It's a pleasure to be here today. I really appreciate Dassault Systems giving me the opportunity to speak to you all. As Karen said, my name is Bill Murray, no relation to the actor, but it does help me get reservations at restaurants sometimes when they're booked. And that's a true story. At a very nice restaurant in LA, and they were a little surprised when I showed up and not the other Bill Murray. So, as Karen mentioned, I'm with the Medical Device Innovation Consortium. I've been involved in medical devices for most of my career, and I got involved with the consortium, and it really aligns well with Dassault's belief in collaboration, in that as the industry started to evolve and mature, we ended up with challenges in terms of the regulatory process and the reimbursement processes, and so innovation was really becoming much more challenging. So what happened was the concept came forward to develop a public-private partnership to collaborate on those things that are of common need and importance, and basically, as the director of FDA says, bring the best and brightest throughout the ecosystem together to work on the more challenging problems that we have. So we work cooperatively throughout the ecosystem. Samuya Dassault System is one of our members, to develop tools and methods to reduce the time it takes to develop, assess, and ultimately review new technologies. And the ultimate benefit is to help patients. So we are a nonprofit organization, and we're funded through grants, contracts, and research, as well as member dues. I'm going to talk today about healthcare in a connected world, but the way I'd like to start this is just to provide some context. Everybody is aware of the healthcare system and the challenges we have, but sometimes it's hard to even fathom the scope and size of the industry. So if you look at the industry, first of all, it's one of the most regulated industries in the world. And so with that, obviously, comes challenges as you look at innovation, and you need to have a very well-defined, established construct for how you do development within this ecosystem. Magnitude of the industry, by 2020, we expect the industry to be $8.7 trillion. That's almost unbelievable, the size. Today it's $7 trillion. So it's going to continue to grow, and it's one of the biggest social challenges there are across the world. Chronic disease is the biggest healthcare challenge faced in the developed world. It's 50% of the healthcare expenditures. So with that, as a challenge, it's also the opportunity. So the three leading causes of death are cardiovascular disease, cancer, and respiratory disease. So again, I'm coming from the medical device community, and all of these areas are areas where medical technology plays a very important role. Consolidation is happening within the payer side of the community, which is influencing how innovation is happening. Those consolidators right now are, I'll say, data holders, if not hoarders. And what we are looking at doing is finding ways to get access to the data, because the data that's at the point of care is critically important to informing new developments, as well as the quality and the performance of existing products. And any of us in the United States that's had the opportunity to use the healthcare system understands how challenging it is at times to get your health information from provider A to provider B in our system today. The other thing that's happening, and I'll speak a little bit more to this, is life expectancy, which is a positive thing, but it puts additional stress on our healthcare system. So the number of 65-year-olds will increase by 8%. And that number doesn't look so big here, but I'll show you another chart that puts it in percentages that gives you a stark contrast as to what this will mean for societies going forward. And all of this means that when there's needs, that drives innovation. And so this continues to be an important area of opportunity for innovation, both in clinical performance, so new therapies, new innovations, new diagnostics, as well as innovations in cost improvement, which is one of the areas that I think medical technology and devices in particular have a really important role to play. So just a little bit more on the economic background, then I'm going to get into the technology. So this is per capita total expenditure on average at an average exchange rate in 2014 dollars. And you can see here's the unique challenge. Every one of these countries has a challenge, but the unique challenge that the US has is what we spend on healthcare per capita is almost $3,500 more than the next most high-cost country, Australia. But in general, it's over twice what the average is of the developed world. And that's a huge competitiveness challenge and budgetary challenge for our nation. And then the last thing I'll say here, I mentioned the percentage of the population over 65. So in 2010, you can see that Japan led the pack, followed by Germany in terms of the percentage of their population over 65. And the US was just over 13%. In the next roughly 30 years, you're going to see that the percentage of the population over 65 is going to grow significantly. And this is why there's an imperative and a mandate for new approaches to treating patients in care, especially chronic disease as our population ages. So that lays out the challenge on the demographic side. The last thing I would say is that what's happening as a result is our systems are expecting and demanding, our culture is expecting increased evidence. And in particular, this is some data that was published a few years ago on evidence of value. And I know it's a little hard to read, but basically what it's saying is Medicare, which is the reimbursement arm for our health plans for senior citizens, the coverage decisions for new technologies, the probability of getting a positive coverage decision is 1/20th of what it was earlier in the decade. And so what that is saying is new technologies have become more challenging to get, not only through the regulatory process, but through the reimbursement process, which ultimately, if you don't get paid, the patients don't get access to the technology. So that's an important mandate as we go forward. So what this is driving is an increase in R&D spending. And so again, medical products versus, I know many of the people in here are pharma biotech. The medical device side of that ecosystem spends about 1/3 what pharma biotech does on R&D in total. The operating performance of medical devices can't sustain the kind of R&D investment that pharma biotech has. So we're looking at innovative new ways to bring technologies forward. So from this uncertainty is a world of radical innovation. I actually took this slide from one of Dassault Systèmes presentations I saw online. And I think you're looking at new market demands, as I said, which is driving new business models and driving the need for new innovations. And that's where, frankly, MDIC has come in terms of looking at how do we innovate and grow in an environment where all of these forces of cost control and demands and regulatory increases are coming in. So in a connected world, one of the major opportunities in an area that MDIC has focused on is modeling. A lot of the evidence generation that is the most expensive piece of innovation for medical devices is the clinical evaluations. So when we started MDIC, which has been in almost 4 years now, I was the first employee, we had a roadmap for what we thought modeling was going to look like. And we had on the left side of this slide the non-clinical aspects of modeling, and we thought that's where we would start because that was a lower risk and more well understood, where the clinical aspects of modeling would be further out. That's what we thought. And what we found is that there's a lot of work and established practices, frankly some competitive challenges of collaboration in that area because a lot of people have already developed and evolved. And in the clinical area, there was not nearly as much going on, and so that ended up being an opportunity for us to really look at new models for innovation. And so we developed a focus on what we're calling virtual patients and the virtual device. And this the horizontal part of this graph looks at the total product life cycle from the context of a medical technology, medical device company. And then the bar charts there speak to a survey we did that talked about expertise or barriers to increasing the use of modeling and simulation. And you can see expertise, regulatory expectations, et cetera. Regulatory expectations were the #1 concern that people had as to expanding the use of modeling more comprehensively throughout the total product life cycle. And I highlighted 2 orange areas where you could see that not one of our members, we have 59 members, was using modeling in the clinical environment or in the reimbursement environment. And so this was a real opportunity if we could figure out how to move forward. So again, because of our collaborative approach, we had FDA people around the table as well as industry experts, and we work in what we call the pre-competitive space. We said, here's a real opportunity, and so we came up with the idea of doing a Moxa Mission, which is essentially a submission which is real in terms of everything put together, and an FDA reviewer goes through it, but it's used in the context of learning, and so it was it's a made-up device that we did, but we went through the whole process, and it helped to build comfort and confidence with the approach on all sides. This is, I've worked very closely is probably the wrong word. Samulia's been a member of MDIC from the very early days of our formation, and they have been an excellent partner, and my organization has worked closely with them. I am not as close to the activities. And the Living Heart Project is an example of a tool that is being used. In fact, it's being embraced by the Center for Devices within FDA. And here's an example. I mentioned the Moxa Mission that we did. This was a defibrillator lead, which is, if you're not familiar with a defibrillator, it's like a pacemaker, but it shocks the heart. And lead reliability had become a major issue, a major concern. And as a result, the traditional solution was to simply increase the number of clinical patients. And it got to a point where new lead technologies was not being brought forward because it was just not cost effective to do it. So you would end up with new technology opportunities that would just be passed on because the cost of innovation became prohibitive. So here's lead factor prediction, and you can simulate, obviously, and many of you know this, the performance of the product. And what we have here is we have the real data that was part of a clinical trial, and then you can simulate out to 95% confidence level. Getting reviewers comfortable with this, the FDA reviewers, is part of the process, and helping them understand that this is a robust way to analyze a new technology. So we've gone through this process. We've started to get some real traction, if you will, with the FDA as well as industry community, because part of it is the industry becoming comfortable with and believing that the FDA will adopt these new approaches. The next thing I'll talk about is the clinical outcomes. So that was an example of evaluating the product performance. The other part of this is really evaluating the clinical outcomes, and this is an exciting area. And again, the Dassault point of bringing virtual and real worlds together is exactly what we're doing here. And this is on the clinical side, what we recognize in some data. One of our member organizations said that their cost of clinical studies, the growth rate in expenses there was roughly double the revenue growth rate of their company, and there was just not a sustainable model. So incorporating models into existing information was an important concept in terms of how to bend the cost curve for evaluating product performance. And as you can see here, what we're looking at is we go from the left in the pie chart where computer modeling is a very small percentage of what's being done, to on the right side where we have computer modeling and now virtual patients. And you can see on the bar graph down below that as you look at the model maturity, you have fewer human subjects and you add more virtual patients into the model. So this is a process we came forward with. This is just a chart that shows as the model matures, you can use the more virtual patients. We did retrospective analysis. This is 4 of our examples. We now have 8, where we've had companies go back and look at their clinical trials and said we could basically reduce the trial size from 12 to 50%. Anybody involved in a clinical study understands that's huge. So this has been a significant innovation opportunity for our members, and so they're very excited. And subsequent to this, we've had 2 of our sponsors now come forward, and they've had their prospective study designs approved by FDA, and so that's the next major milestone. And actually seeing this in practice in a prospective way will then drive others to adopt. And this is from an article that just came out in JAMA. It's the authors are Director Jeff Shuren, who's the Center for Devices and Radiologic Health Director, and his head of clinical trials. And I highlighted in yellow what was in the article that they published. Computer-based modeling may change the way we think about device validation. Clinical information may be derived from simulations. That is a huge statement and cultural shift from the agency, and I think it's a great opportunity for this community as you think about how you perform your validations going forward. The next thing I'll talk about is a trend in terms of real-world end-to-end evidence. So we've now looked at how clinical trials can be informed by modeling and simulation. Now, what's happening now is in the world of big data, there's a tremendous amount of information out there. The challenge is, at least in our system, particularly in the US, that data is in disparate places, and so trying to utilize it's a challenge. But you can see there's a growing demand from the R&D and the top right chart here. And the blue is where the demand for real-world evidence is there. And the opportunity is to use the evidence to inform product design and patient care. And there's more and more of that expectation happening throughout society, and the regulatory people are starting to expect it. And what you're seeing in the device world is more coverage with continued evidence development post-approval through registries. So again, the real-world evidence enables end-to-end management of the total product life cycle, and it can inform the product performance out in the field in a way that's very difficult today, but also equally importantly is it will inform new innovations as an understanding of where the next unmet needs are. And I'll just show this map briefly. So MDIC was awarded the coordinating center to put together this federated set of data systems for medical devices by FDA last fall. And so the first thing we did is we've developed a landscape of what's out there today in real-world evidence. And I know this is a very small chart. The deeper the blue color, the more evidence is there. What this is really telling you is the vertical axis speaks to the FDA divisions out there, so it's the cardiovascular, orthopedic, et cetera, and the horizontal is the total product life cycle. Almost all of the evidence today is in cardiovascular, and it is in the post-market setting and mostly safety surveillance. So that's the opportunity we have, is to extend that to other technologic areas, as well as bring it back to the innovation ecosystem in the early development side of the total product life cycle. And lastly, I'd like to talk a little bit about digital health. Digital health is going to be an important part of how we address the broader chronic disease health management question for our society. And what we're seeing here, and you can, on the left side you can see I've circled high, Right now, where digital health is and monitoring is happening is first is preventative care and just wellness, Fitbits, heart monitors, et cetera. And then it's the other area where it has become an important tool is in high-risk care management. So end-stage heart failure patients, for example, is an area where the high-risk management. And you can see, as with consumer trends in general, there is more use of health applications to monitor the health performance. Across the total product lifecycle, these are just some examples of where digital health has enabled care today with wearable smart devices, as an example. And you can see what's happening is we're getting new entrants coming into this part of the ecosystem. So this one shows Microsoft as an example. MDIC recently, Watson, IBM Watson Healthcare just joined as an example of a non-traditional medical device player. This chart here is showing you the chronic disease areas, and you can see this is, if you look at where digital health is going to play a significant role, is in diabetes, cardiovascular disease, pulmonary disease, and asthma. And digital health has significant opportunities to help manage and monitor and ultimately inform treatments for these patients. And so as we go forward, we see this as a major opportunity and one where innovation in the digital health realm will have a significant impact on cost and the medical technology approach. Finally, I just say that what this is doing is adding to the complexity on the regulatory side. So in addition to FDA now, we've got FCC and we've got other ONC, we've got other organizations within the federal government that are involved. And so that's also why some of the systems and tools that you all use are going to be incredibly important as the complexity is going to increase, not decrease, for regulation in this environment. And so if you, just to wrap up here, Medical Device Innovation Consortium, we're, again, a public-private partnership, very committed to developing new tools and methods and partnering with companies like your organizations as well as Dassault Systems. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all today. Thank you very much.